Um, so moving on to our second speaker, we have Jack Williams, and Jack's going to tell us about the inefficient transfer of diatoms. So over to you, Jack.
Great. Thank you, Adrian. I'll share my screen. Okay, hopefully you can all see my screen now.
Yep, that's fine.
Fantastic. Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming along. My name is Jack. As Adrian said, I'm a PhD student, just handed in my thesis at the University of Southampton and the Oceanography Centre in the UK. And today I'll be presenting to you some work bringing together data from a couple of projects in the Southern Ocean, looking at the attenuation of sinking particle fluxes and how efficiently those various fluxes are transferred to depth. So I have many people to thank, first of all. Firstly, my supervisor, Sari, and Adrian for giving me the in to work with this wonderful data set when I was first starting out. And secondly, to the very many wonderful co-authors who worked so hard on this, and more broadly to everyone involved in the cover project and this leg of the comics cruise we were working with as well. So yeah, this is a biological carbon pump talk, and everyone here is very well acquainted with this set of processes describing the surface production, transfer to depth, remineralization of organic carbon, and the implications of this on atmospheric CO2. It's also a story about everyone's favorite ocean, I think, the Southern Ocean, and of course about the Twilight Zone, which is what brings us all here. As I've alluded to, this work was bringing together some data from the Custard project, which was based in the sort of Southeast Pacific sector, looking at the depth of remineralization of carbon in relation to different water masses of the Southern Ocean overturning circulation, and the implications of this for storage, and also the Comics project, which was specifically looking at the mesopelagic and carbon storage there. And the cruise that we're using data from that project is in the decline of a bloom downstream of the South Georgia Plateau. And what united both of these projects was they're both making direct measurements of sinking particulate fluxes through the mesopelagic with marine snowcatchers, doing this not just for carbon, but also for biogenic silica, chlorophyll, some other measurements as well. So we wanted to get at, use this to get at a question about the diatoms. So specifically, how efficiently are they transferred to depth? Because there's quite some conflicting information on this. So in the red corner, we have these studies often from sort of global compilations, global studies which observe lowest transfer efficiencies in diatom-dominated sites or in high latitudes where you might expect diatoms to dominate. And then on the other hand, you have a lot of these sort of individual studies, also the sort of compilation from Wiedmann et al., which observe very high transfer efficiencies for diatoms. So putting this together with how understudied the Southern Ocean has been, and also with the focus on the Twilight Zone, there was not a particularly clear picture, so it's something we wanted to address. So the direct flux measurements from these sites, the Custard and the Comics projects encompass both the Atlantic and the Pacific sectors of the Southern Ocean, and some iron fertilized, some iron limited regimes, and varying levels of primary production. And at these sites, we assess the rate at which particulate fluxes of POC, particulate organic carbon, biogenic silica, and chlorophyll were attenuated with depth. So what were we expecting to see? If you look on the left-hand panel, probably something a bit like this. So this shows Martin's B, sort of the power, the exponent of the power law function, where higher B is more rapid, shallow flux attenuation. And we were expecting to see POC being more rapidly attenuated, and to BSI, biogenic silica, being remineralized a little bit slower, and potentially due to silica's higher excess density as well. These are our Martin's B values for organic carbon, and they're pretty much in keeping with previous B values measured in the Southern Ocean. Towards the lower end of the range of measurements, our measurements range from about 0.25 to 1. Yet when we look at the biogenic silica fluxes, indicative of the diatoms, we see something really surprising. We actually observe the carbon fluxes to be attenuated more slowly than the biogenic silica fluxes. So in other words, the sinking carbon is being more efficiently transferred through the mesopelagic than the upper mesopelagic than biogenic silica. And just for completion, qualifier was most rapidly attenuated. So why was this happening with the carbon and the silica? We first considered whether there could be a temporal change, sort of confounding what we're measuring, wherein increasing solidification in surface waters would sort of lead to that temporal effect. But at the Atlantic site, the P3 site, we actually saw decreasing molar ratios throughout the study period over time and minimal ion stress. And then at the custard sites, there was an increase in the sort of biogenic silica to POC molar ratios particles, but not enough to explain the vertical changes that we saw and the changes we saw with depth. So we can sort of rule that out as at least the main cause for these results. We also considered whether carbonate depth could have been laterally affected and represent a different community to that we were measuring at the surface, but we ruled this out given relatively constant particle back trajectories and weak current speeds in the mesopelagic from ADCP shipboard measurements. For the sake of completion, we considered whether maybe the established wisdom could not, it wasn't true in this circumstance. Maybe biogenic silica was being more swiftly remineralized than organic carbon. But we felt that was pretty unlikely given that colder temperatures generally enhance preferential preservation of silica due to inhibiting the enzymes that dissolve the organic coatings on the frustules. And so we excluded that one. And then that led us to sort of hypothesize that ecosystem processes could be decoupling the silica and the carbon fluxes into two independent pools. So some poorly transferred, maybe slow sinking silica-rich pool and a rapidly sinking carbon-rich pool. So for instance, this could be buoyancy regulation, fragmentation, greater repackaging of carbon. So diatoms are known to regulate their buoyancy, of course, coinciding sometimes with changes in life stage. And Fred Lemoyne's currently writing a paper about on the custard stations, we observed great number of diatom resting spores. We were calling that blob. So watch that space. And this could be a contributing factor if buoyancy regulation is more widespread, or if diatoms or if the spores are more widespread. This could be sort of arresting their sinking and diminishing the sinking fluxes of silica. At the comic site, we also have measurements of photochemical efficiency. I think it's from Joe Ainsworth's paper, perhaps, suggesting that in the upper mesopelagic at 250 meters, 500 meters, we can have viable diatoms at these depths, so potentially still able to regulate their buoyancy. And that was it. They may be sustained at these depths by mesopelagic peaks in which Joe identified in her paper, peaks of iron. And in terms of a vector for carbon that's not diatom associated, we think it's most likely carbon-rich fecal pellets and not diatoms, which are the main vectors of POC flux depth in these high flux periods. So although biogenic silica is generally enhanced in fecal pellets relative to a food source, if our mesozooplankton weren't grazing on, if they were grazing on microzooplankton rather than directly on diatoms, or at least only on lightly solidified species, this could end up in your POC-rich fecal pellets of large zooplankton. And we, for some reason, think this might be the case at the comic site. We have high flagellate abundance in the upper mesopelagic and a lack of synchronized vertical migration. That's reported in Kathleen Cook's paper, I think, which could mean that these larger zooplankton are feeding on microzooplankton at depth rather than directly on diatoms. And then a bit of a smoking gun. We're also pretty lucky that Clara Mano was doing some work at with deep sediment trap fluxes at that site during our study period. And sure enough, they're dominated by fecal pellets during the period of the study, and they're also carbon rich. And the molar ratios are in pretty good agreement with those measured in our marine snow catchers overlying them. So we're pretty confident about reconciling our mesopelagic fluxes with the deep fluxes at PO3, given that there were these coincident measurements. But at the custard in the Pacific sector, we didn't have these coincident measurements. So we decided to extrapolate fluxes to depth to compare with the deep fluxes at P3 and also more broadly previously measured molar ratios throughout the subantarctic zone and the polar frontal zone of the Southern Ocean. So the little black circles you can see are Clara Mano's molar ratios from the deep trap at P3, and the black line at the top is the molar ratio as the ratio of our Martin's B curves for silica to carbon at our TS site, so the southernmost Pacific sector site. We chose that site because it's the best comparison with the comic site and that it was bloom forming. So you can see the Mano ratios, the deep sediment traps there are fairly low for 2,000 meters. If we extrapolate we extrapolated our molar ratios in two ways. The first way, we extrapolated what we observed in the upper mesopelagic all the way down through the water column, and they're way lower than even Clara Mano's ratios. I don't think that's too surprising, given that the attenuation in the mesopelagic is known to be an area of really rapid attenuation compared to deep sea. I think we'd hardly be the first to caution against extrapolating attenuation rates in one part of the water column to the whole water column. And so we also extrapolated the molar ratios from the upper mesopelagic using literature values for biogenic silica dissolution and carbon remineralization at 4 degrees centigrade. And it works pretty nicely. It agrees a little bit better with the Mano ratios. And to put that into context with sort of more broad deep sediment trap molar ratios, we see they fall towards our extrapolated ratios would fall towards the low end of the range, but within the range. So pretty happy that we can start to reconcile those fairly low marine snowcatcher molar ratios in the mesopelagic with previous measurements at depth. But there's one thing I haven't shown here, and that's that I've actually cropped the axes. And you'll notice that axis on the second part of the plot goes all the way up to 12. So the range of molar ratios observed at depth is pretty huge, could be well over an order of magnitude more than what we observed, sort of exiting the mesopelagic. And I think that's really important to bear in mind when looking at what our work implies. I'll come back to that in a second. So what can we take from this? If we were to just look at the carbon transfer efficiency, the attenuation rates, and the diatom abundance here, we'd probably look at it and just say, okay, great, our diatoms give us a really high transfer efficiency, low attenuation rates. But we've shown that through this part of the Southern Ocean, diatoms are not always the main vector, and that these sort of diatomaceous silica fluxes may be more rapidly attenuated than carbon fluxes. So just because diatom's present in the surface doesn't necessarily mean they're a key vector transferring carbon to the deep. So the correlation doesn't always have to be the causation in this case. Processes such as buoyancy regulation, grazer repackaging of carbon may be important processes in governing the transfer efficiency here and counteracting any biomineral ballast effects. And to look at it on a bigger scale, I suppose. If the diatoms aren't so important for transferring carbon to deep ocean, the impact of climate change on the biological carbon pump, if community composition is changing, may be smaller than we thought previously. And lastly, I want to caveat all this with an important point and throw up something I can't answer quite just yet. So given the wide range of molar ratios that we just saw, the many studies that pose diatoms to be efficiently transferred to depth, and the lack of preformed silica in subantarctic mode water, it's clear that at some times a year, silica that must be sat in the surface or being recycled in the upper mesopelagic during our study period, it's got to make it to depth at some point. So we're not saying diatoms are never transferred to depth efficiently, or we should do away with them altogether, do away with ballasting. But if this is happening at a different time of year to when much of the carbon is transferred, then that still has big implications for the mechanistic understanding of what drives the biological carbon pump. So the question that throws up to me is, what determines when diatoms are transferred efficiently and inefficiently? And I think this is nowhere better illustrated than at the P3 site, the Atlantic site in South Georgia, wherein in another year, it's been observed there that diatoms are really, really important for deep sea carbon transfer. So even at the same site, you can have totally different sort of response processes acting year to year. So I think resolving why in some years we have such a decoupling of the carbon fluxes from the diatoms, and in other years we might not see that, that's going to be potentially important for that mechanistic understanding. I'd like to just thank all the co-authors again, and thank everyone involved in the Custard and the Comics projects for letting me stand on your very wise shoulders, and also just signpost a work that came out from the Comics project just a couple of days ago from Sari Ging, my PhD supervisor. So if you want to know a bit more about the diatom dynamics at the Comics site, you can check this out. And I know there's more coming out of the Custard project as well. So thank you all for listening. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that, Jack. So over to questions once again. So we have quite a bit of time for that. So please don't hold back. Anybody has any questions, please just put your hands up and I'll try and spot you on the. So let me just scan down. You seem to be getting away lightly at the moment, Jack. I'm sure questions will come. Oh, congratulations again on the thesis in, by the way.
Oh, thank you, Adrian. Thanks.
Emma.
Hello. Oh, hang on. My camera's not on properly.
We can hear you, okay.
All right. Okay, never mind. Thanks so much, Jack. That was really super interesting. I had a question. Did you measure the silica in the slow or suspended fractions of the smoke catcher? Was this just the fast sinking you're reporting here?
So when I'm talking about the molar ratios, I'm talking about the total molar ratio of the sinking fluxes. So like it's essentially a total sinking molar ratio, the slow and the fast summed together. We did also obviously have those the silica and the carbon separately in different fractions, and also in the time zero as well, as like a comparison to the SAPs and the CTD.
Okay, awesome. So it didn't show anything different then if you split it out between the two sizes?
Not really. So when you looked at them, it was quite a while ago I did this. It was like one of the earlier steps. There were a couple of misfires and like some profiles also where sort of very low concentrations and maybe only a couple of marine snow catchers in the individual profile. So that at that point we sort of decided to pool everything and look at it in a sort of more bulk capacity. I can't recall off the top of my head whether we saw any big differences between the slow and the fast sinking fluxes. My gut is going to say, and I'll check this before the Viva, that the fast sinking fluxes were probably more consistent and the slow sinking fluxes were pretty variable. And
Yeah.
that I put that down largely just to the much lower concentrations that might have just meant there's a bit more sort of random variability introduced into the signal. But
Okay, yeah. It can also be really hard, right, to get enough material from the fast sinking alone unless you're in like a particularly good spot. So sometimes you have to pull it. Awesome. Thanks so much.
Thanks. Looking forward to seeing you in a few weeks.
Yes,
Thank you.
me too.
Thank you very much for the question, Emma. Any other questions for Jack? Let me just scan through. I say, if you do have any questions after the talk, sometimes these things occur to you afterwards, and please do feel free to contact Jack. I'm sure we wouldn't mind answering it. Right, okay. I think in that case, we will wrap things up. Thank you very much to both our speakers. 2 excellent talks, 2 great way to start the year, even if we have started it a little late. So thank you once again to Randy and to Jack. And hopefully we'll be advertising another call with another couple of excellent talks in the near future. Otherwise, thank you all very much for joining the call, and do check out the catalogue of other talks on our YouTube channel. Thanks, and see you around.
Thank you.
Thanks, Adrian. Bye-bye.